We are on high alert. We will protect the people of Israel. This attack will have consequences. We have plans, and we will operate at the place and time we decide.
In short, based on what we know at this point, this attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective.
Citizens of Israel, we are in the midst of a campaign against Iran's axis of evil. These are days of great achievements and great challenges.
Welcome to the day. Iran's president has hailed what he called a decisive response after ordering a large-scale missile attack against Israel. Almost 200 ballistic missiles were launched at Israeli cities, with warning sirens heard in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Tehran said the retaliatory strike was in response to the killings of Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut and Hamas's Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran earlier this year. Both leaders of militant groups widely classified as terrorist organisations. In a moment, we'll get the reaction from the US. First, here's what the Israeli military has said about the Iranian attack.
We are on high alert. We will protect the people of Israel. This attack will have consequences. We have plans, and we will operate at the place and time we decide.
2 hours ago, Iran, for the second time in the space of 5 months, launched a direct attack on Israel, including some 200 ballistic missiles. This is totally unacceptable, and the entire world should condemn it. Initial reports suggest that Israel, with the active support of the United States and other partners, effectively defeated this attack. We have demonstrated once again our commitment to Israel's defense. We'll remain in very close touch with Israel and other partners in the region in the hours and days ahead.
Let's get more on this escalating crisis then with DW's Middle East analyst, Shani Rozanes. Also with us is Hans-Jakob Schindler, who's Senior Director at the Counter Extremism Project here in Berlin. That's an NGO working to fight the growing threat posed by extremist ideologies. Welcome both. Let me start with you, Hans-Jakob. Did you see this coming?
It was difficult to not expect Iran to react. Iran's actual regional power projection network are the proxies. And now one of the proxies lost its leader in Tehran, the other proxy lost its leader at home. If Iran would not show to its proxy network that it has absolutely any skin in the game, if it would give the impression that they are just there to die for Iran, the loyalty of groups that it needs to project its power in the region would be under question. So some type of response was expected. The choice was, are we seeing a wave of terrorist attacks against Israeli and Jewish targets internationally, or are we seeing this kind of more conventional attack? And apparently the decision was to do this more conventional.
See, that's interesting. You're saying that the impetus for this as much about Iran demonstrating to its own proxies that it's not asleep on the job as it is dealing with Israel. Shani, the second direct attack from Iran on Israel, but I think this one looks different from April's.
Oh, definitely, it is. First of all, according to Pentagon, this is double in its intensity, and the Iranians were not wasting time on not so effective vehicles that they've tried in the previous attacks. So drones, for example, they were mostly focused on the missiles, the ballistic missiles, hoping they would get better rates of success. What seems to have failed, I think this is something we have joint on both cases, that Israel manages with American support to intercept almost all of the barrage. But what we are seeing that is different this time is that Israel has since then has tried in the last weeks to re-establish the rules of the game, and we're not quite sure what the Israel response would be, in the sense that before we felt like it will be contained, now we're not quite sure. And before we were discussing how Israel had back in April, the message sending, we will respond according to the result, not the intent that Iran had in its attack. Now it's exactly the other way around. Israel will respond according to Iran's intent, meaning a very severe response, regardless of the fact that the result of the attack was actually very, very mild.
So let's speculate then on the likely Israeli response.
Well, what we're hearing from Israeli sources all over in the last hours is that it's going to be a very harsh response. They're going to try to target Iranian infrastructure and locations, strategic points connected to oil, to the economy, to sort of try and hit Iran in the belly. We're not talking yet about the nuclear facilities, so not going all in, but trying to maybe bring some assaults that will show the fragility of the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic regime, and sort of maybe help the crumbling process that will maybe bring to finally maybe the beginning of the end of that regime that Israel has for so long wanted to see out.
And Hans-Jakob Schindler, how dirty do you see the United States getting its hands in this as it escalates? We heard from the Secretary of State saying that the US had provided active support for Israel. How active can you see them getting?
Look, I mean, if this gets completely out of control and it escalates into a more wider regional conflict, there's no way for the US to stay on the sidelines. But it's also clear that no US president or administration wants to start a new war weeks before the presidential election. So they're going to do their utmost to support Israel in its defense, deliver weapons, but not get actively involved. It is going to get tricky. If the Iranians are going to do what they said they will do, is i.e. really encourage the proxies around the regions to intensify their attacks, and part of these proxies have an uncomfortable history of hitting not Israeli but US targets in the region, and there will be a point where the US administration will have to re-establish its own deterrence against these proxy networks by hitting these proxies or potentially even Tehran.
Shani, we reached this point in this phase of this decades-long escalating disaster because about a week ago, the Israeli War Cabinet decided to expand its war goals. Originally, get back the hostages, destroy Hamas. To that, they added the return of Israeli citizens to the north of the country. What was the impetus for that, to add that to the war goals and therefore speed this escalation?
Well, some of it was political for Netanyahu. I think, no doubt, he wanted to show some achievements and he realized it's easier to do on a northern front. And he wanted to also show that he's listening to the growing criticism inside Israel from not only those evicted, but many others who said Israel has no strategy when it comes to the north. We need to change that. But also another part of it we need to keep in mind is we're saying, Israel trying to redraw the lines of the conflict in the region and mostly trying, hopefully, if we're talking about, you were talking about Gaza and how this is connecting to the war goals of Israel. They hope that by weakening Iran and its axis and its proxies, they will manage to send a message to Hamas, to Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, in Gaza, saying, your backers are actually weaker than you think. You have nowhere to go. You need to start, agreeing to concessions and a deal and maybe come to wrapping up also Gaza in addition to Lebanon.
Hans-Jakob, if this gets uglier, who can Iran and Israel call on in the region to support them either diplomatically or militarily? We'll leave the United States out of this, but just looking at the regional map, what are we looking at?
Look, I mean, the only military confrontation between Iran and Israel that is thinkable is mutual airstrikes. Right? There is no land connection between Israel and Iran, so there's not going to be an invasion, nor does the Israeli military have the capability to invade Iran or vice versa. So we're looking at regional states. As we've seen tonight again, quite a few regional states are happy to shoot down Iranian rockets, and I'm quite sure they're not going to shoot down Israeli airplanes or rockets going to Iran, simply because the bilateral relationships between regional states, due to the Abraham Accords, but also due to the regional rivalry between Iran and pretty much everyone else in the region, save Syria, means that they're going to help Israel more likely than they're going to help Iran. Iran really doesn't have any regional allies except extremely weak ones. For example, the Syrian regime, which is very busy with its own survival and really not able to support Iran. It needs Iranian support to stay in power. Other than that, we are looking very far afield of countries that may have sympathies at one point or the other. Both Russia and China are going to try to infuse themselves into this situation, but not in a military sense, but trying to take diplomatic advantage of the trouble that the region is in and of potential involvement of the administration in that trouble.
Listen, we'll leave it there. Much more to say.
Just to say, there's going to be very tense days ahead of us. The Jewish New Year is coming, a very sensitive time of the year, always in Israel, definitely after October 7th and definitely after this attack. The next couple of days are going to be very, very intense. We do watch
Thank you so much, both. Shani Rozanes is DW's Middle East analyst. Hans-Jakob Schindler is from the Counter Extremism Project here in Berlin. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's go to journalist Balig Sladeen in Tel Aviv. Welcome back, Balig. What are those consequences likely to look like?
Well, just a short while ago, the Wall Street Journal said that Israel, and through Arab players in the Middle East, has conveyed a message to Iran that if Iran attacks Israel, Israel will target the nuclear facilities and also the oil facilities in Iran. Most likely, that's what they do, according to the Wall Street Journal. And this is also the demand from Israeli politicians in the past couple of hours after this attack from Iran, that they even describe as announcement of war against Israel, and they are demanding that the Israeli government takes that action. Now, of course, we still don't know how that response is going to be, and this response is going to be, of course, and the question is whether this response is going to be in coordination with the Americans, that also said, by the way, that there will be consequences for this attack. So this is the possibility that Israel attacks Iran's economy, Iran's symbols of authority in Iran, the Iranian regime itself. Maybe the next few hours will give us more clarification on that thing.
And talk us through some of the reactions there amongst people to tonight's attack.
Well, thankfully, no one was hurt in that attack, although that it was tense half an hour from around 10 minutes before 8 o'clock this evening. But on the other hand, the rage among the Israelis, and of course, what we've heard from politicians today, by the way, also from the opposition in Israel, that said that we fully support the Israeli coalition to take action against Iran. We've heard the Israeli ministers saying that the Iranians made a mistake today, and just like Hezbollah paid for the mistake and Hamas paid for the mistake, then Iran will pay for that mistake as well, again demanding that large-scale attack that would target Iranian very sensitive facilities. Maybe this is going to be the case, maybe not, but what we hear from the Israeli side is that there will be an attack, and it will be very soon, in order to keep that deterrence that Israel has gotten throughout the past 2 months.
Now, the big news before we heard about this Iranian attack a couple of hours ago, the big news of the day was that Israel had announced it was carrying out what it called limited raids into southern Lebanon. Hezbollah, as far as I'm aware, has been disputing this. What can you tell us about those raids, Balig?
Well, I would say what the Israeli military is saying, and also how the denial by Hezbollah is explained in Israel. First of all, the IDF spokesperson said that they are carrying out raids on the Israeli northern border. They didn't say in southern Lebanon. They didn't frame it that way, at least. But from what we understand, and also from what we have seen by the videos that the IDF has published, that they're not from recent hours, but they have been showing the situation in the past 12 months, attacks, raids inside the territory of Lebanon, even going into tunnels and bringing back and dismantling those tunnels. Also, the Israeli perspective is saying that Hezbollah wants to keep as much as possible their image as the protector of Lebanon, and that's why they're denying that the Israeli forces are conducting those raids. And they want to keep that image, especially after the attacks that has been happening since a couple of weeks, the walkie-talkie attacks, and later on, of course, the series of assassinations, and the most important assassination of the Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. This is how the Israelis see that. Maybe that's the case, maybe that's not the case. But until now, we're talking anyway about limited operations that the Israeli side is conducting on that area, in that area.
Okay, thank you for that, Balig. Balig Sladeen in Tel Aviv. Let's get more on tonight's Iranian attack on Israel from Alex Vatanka, who is founding director of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute. Welcome to DW. Why has Iran chosen to attack Israel openly now, directly, rather than through proxies?
It seems that they have calculated that if they didn't do anything, that Israel will continue to go down the path of hitting Iranian allies, as we saw last week with the killing of Hassan Nasrallah and other Iranian partners, militant partners in places like Syria and Iraq. So they've made the calculation that they couldn't not do anything, and they have now, as we just heard, retaliated with about these 200 missiles. The one big difference I have to say between this round and the last round in April is last time they retaliated against Israel striking their consulate in Damascus, but they took 2 weeks to retaliate, and we could really put that down as an Iranian attempt to save face. This time around, it happened much faster. And from what I can gather so far, they didn't really coordinate much at all, if you believe Washington, with the Americans. So this was aimed to really get Israel's attention. And now we have to see what Israel's response will be. We've heard in the last few hours that that response could come as early as the next few hours.
We'll come to that. Let me just interrogate you further on your first answer there, because what you seem to be saying is that this Iranian action was in large part in order to appease the proxies that it has been controlling, for them to see that Iran is doing something.
Yes, that's part of it, because you could if you were a member of one of these militant Arab groups in the region, be it Hezbollah, the Hashd al-Sha'bi, the proxies in Syria and Iraq, or the Houthis in Yemen, you have good grounds to question the leadership of the Islamic Republic of the axis of resistance against Israel if the Iranians actually don't do anything. So there is that, for sure. But I also think that maybe the thinking in Iran is that this Israeli government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set in its decision to take the fight all the way to Tehran. And if you listen to what Prime Minister Netanyahu said in his video to the Iranian people, he basically said in so many words that his aim, his hope, is regime change in Tehran. If that is what Israel wants to do, then the space for the Iranians to sit and wait is suddenly that much more smaller space than was the case, say, just in April.
So, as everybody looks over the edge into the abyss, do you have to ask yourself, could Tehran withstand a direct Israeli retaliation? This whole thing looks like it's out of everyone's control.
Let me just point out some basics here, because, militarily, Iran is at a disadvantage. Yes, the volley of missiles fired at Israel might seem impressive on social media, but Iran doesn't have the military edge over Israel, and certainly not the United States. Iran is also regionally kind of isolated, if you will. There are very few countries out there, if any, that would come to Iran's aid. And I will include Russia and China. The proxies are small. Yes, they'll side with Iran, but they're not going to have the weight that Iran would need in a conflict with Israel that has not only the United States, but plenty of European countries behind it. Economically, Iran is broken, so the idea that they can enter into a war, again, it's a very difficult proposition for them. And last point I make is that the Iranian people, by and large, are against what the regime is doing in the region, including the sort of tit for tat that we've seen and its ideological hostility towards the state of Israel. But all that said, this is the Islamic Republic of Iran. a regime that going back to 1979 has miscalculated plenty of times. So it's really hard to sort of figure out whether they're going to, bite more than they can chew, because that has proven in the past to be the case.
Fascinating analysis, and we thank you for it. Alex Vatanka from the Middle East Institute. So what is the Washington perspective on all this? Let's join our special correspondent, Ibrahim, who's who's in the US Capitol. Welcome, Aya. What response has Israel had from its most powerful ally?
Well, certainly this is something that the White House and U.S. officials had anticipated, and even before the attack took place, we've heard U.S. officials say that there will be a retaliation, that there will be a response to this attack, a considerable response to this attack if Iran does indeed go through. That we know that the president and the vice president had observed the attack in real time from the Situation Room, and that now there are, tight consultations between U.S. officials and their Israeli counterparts about what the next steps would be. But so far, nothing has been done from the American side, at least.
There have been statements coming out of the U.S. administration. The first appearance was from U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. We'll listen to him and then come back to you, Aya.
Obviously, this is a significant escalation by Iran, a significant event, and it is equally significant that we were able to step up with Israel and create a situation in which no one was killed in this attack in Israel, so far as we know at this time. We are now going to look at what the appropriate next steps are to secure, first and foremost, American interests, and then to promote stability to the maximum extent possible as we go forward. Yeah.
And just to clarify that, interestingly, no Israeli citizen killed in that Iranian attack. One Palestinian civilian reportedly killed by shrapnel in the occupied West Bank. Ibrahim, what levers does the US have over Israel, or indeed anyone in the Middle East, to achieve the maximum stability that Jake Sullivan talks about there?
Well, certainly in the past weeks, months, when it came to negotiations for a ceasefire and a deal that would see the release of hostages from Gaza, you could see that there was a lot of discord between the Israeli leadership and the American leadership. Oftentimes, the American leadership saying that Israel was ready to accept a deal, and then that deal not coming through for whatever reason. And there were real questions about the kind of leverage that the United States has on Israel when it comes to this war, even though the United States is by far the largest supplier of arms for Israel's war effort in Gaza. When it comes to this particular chapter in this now almost 1 year long conflict, since October 7th of last year, the American attitude does seem to be different. When Israel launched its ground invasion of southern Lebanon, the statement that came out of the Department of Justice seemed to be one of support for that move. And again, in the framework, according to the Department of Justice, of Israel's right to defend itself, and that Hezbollah installations in southern Lebanon and elsewhere are a legitimate target for Israel. So it seems that in this particular moment, the question of leverage is not that it's irrelevant, but it does seem to take a backseat to the fact that it appears that the United States is supporting what Israel is doing right now, especially now that it has come under direct attack. Remember, this is the second time that Israel comes under direct attack from Iran. The first time being, of course, in April with that drone with the attack with drones on Israel.
So, as this escalates, what do you think Washington's next move is likely to be? Does it just sit there and continue to supply arms passively, or does it get involved?
It's very unclear and very, very difficult to say what kind of response Washington there will be a response, however. That is certainly something that we heard from Jake Sullivan today, that there will be some kind of response, unclear to what extent the United States will be involved directly. We know how Israel responded to the last Iranian attack in April, and that was with a single missile strike on Isfahan, not on a nuclear facility, but near a nuclear facility on a missile warhead there in Iran. And so the big question now is this retaliation move going to involve a direct attack on Iranian nuclear facilities? That is unclear. We have not heard any statements to that effect, I want to emphasize, but that's certainly what people in Washington are asking. And given that this attack was more severe than the attack in April, we can expect that the response will also be more severe. But it's just something that we're going to have to wait, see and observe.
Thank you, Aya. DW Special Correspondent Aya Ibrahim in Washington.
Well, the US has confirmed it helped Israel shoot down the Iranian missiles. Here's US President Joe Biden.
At my direction, the United States military actively supported the defense of Israel, and we're still assessing the impact. But based on what we know now, the attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. And this is testament to Israeli military capability and U.S. military. It's also a testament to intensive planning between the United States and Israel to anticipate and defend against the brazen attack we expected. Make no mistake, the United States is fully supportive of Israel.
Let's speak now to Shaan Shaikh. He's a defence analyst at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW News. First and foremost, what's your assessment of how Israel's Iron Dome coped with the attack?
Yeah, so within Israel's missile defense architecture, there's actually a lot of different systems. Iron Dome is one system that is designed primarily against these smaller rockets, but you also have the David Sling, the Arrow systems, and so it was likely a combination of these more sophisticated interceptors that were actually used against the Iranian missile attacks.
All right, and also, the Pentagon said it actively helped Israel deal with the Iranian missiles being fired at the country. How important was it then for Israel to have the US helping?
It's always helpful to have a coalition when it comes to air and missile defense. So back in April, when we saw a similar Iranian missile attack directly against Israel, we had seen not just Israel, but the US, France, and several Arab states as well joining in that coalition to provide intelligence and interceptors and just the regional connectivity to defeat these incoming threats. So it's extremely helpful to have more people, more operators and sensors and interceptors involved in these kind of defenses.
Now, what did we learn about Iran's capabilities from this attack? Did they actually intend to cause casualties, do you think?
It's always hard to say what the exact intention was. This was a significant salvo, that's to be sure. It isn't something like a few missiles here and there to send a political message. This is at least, as you had already reported, 180 ballistic missiles. So the intention to cause damage is clear, but how much we've learned, to your question about Iran's missiles, it's kind of a repeat of some of the lessons that we saw back in April, that yes, they can launch this large salvo and it will cause a lot of terror within Israel. Folks have to go into shelters for a decent amount of time, waiting for this operation to end. And of course that there is a risk for escalation. But in terms of military capability, in terms of really affecting Israel's strategic assets, this strike hasn't really changed anything about that. It's fairly weak.
Right, but Israel now has said that it will retaliate. Benjamin Netanyahu said Iran will, quote, pay for it. What do you think that could look like?
There's a number of possible responses. Again, just comparing what we saw earlier in April. Back then, Israel retaliated in fairly limited manner. They had struck a few Iranian air defenses in response to a barrage of somewhere around 500 combined missiles and drones. Here, again, as you've already discussed, Israeli policymakers are very forthcoming about there being a larger retaliation. That might mean striking the missile launchers that were involved in this operation. It could mean hitting the command and control structures, the leadership that was involved in planning here, or it could possibly mean striking some of the Iranian nuclear facilities or those involved in that process and trying to pull that program back. That can be at the high level, but really I think we're all trying to figure out at this point what Israel is planning on doing next.
Shaan, we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us on DW News. Shaan Shaikh with the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
Time to take a look.